Will come to order. Welcome to the March 24th, 2022 meeting of the Audit Committee of the Arizona Board of Regents. I'm Ron Schupman, and I'm going to watch a basketball game. I hope that you all agree. And we always save the best for last. Everybody loves audit. So portions of this are being recorded, as we know. And we are scheduled to adjourn by 5:15. That is our target goal, which we will reach. Do we have any participants on Zoom? I don't think we do. So maybe we'll have Rick.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Rick DeFeller's on Zoom.
Rick, I hope you're feeling better. He hurt himself and is zooming in from home because he's a trooper and he's going to be there if we need him. I hope you're feeling okay, Rick.
I'm doing better, thank you.
Key items on our agenda today is to review correspondence from the Auditor General, receive internal audit review boards and chief audit executive reports, receive an enterprise risk assessment report from Arizona State University, and we will finish the meeting in executive session, which we will further discuss ASU's institutional risk areas, and following our discussions with our regular review of assignments with each of the university chief auditors. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the executive session from May 27th, 2021, and the public session meetings from November 4th, 2021. The May executive session minutes were reviewed by members during our November executive session. No questions or changes have been offered to Rick. The November public session minutes were provided to members in today's agenda book. Are there any questions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I move that the Audit Committee approve the minutes of May 27th, 2021, executive session, and the November 4th, 2022 public, it's got to be 2021, public session. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. The Auditor General correspondence was outlined in your book extensively. If you took the time to look at them, they were 100+ pages long. It is actually our Sunset Audit Review documentation, where there's a lot in there that we can learn from, a lot of actions that we can take. And the results of these audits will make us better as institutions. You know, we're working so fast and so hard to achieve our primary goals, but it's very important that the documentation, such as affiliated agreements, is maintained and that all of our property is properly documented and controlled. So I urge you as regents and those at the universities to use these as documents to help make us even better than we are, and use audit in the spirit that it can really be of most help to us. And that is to allow us to be as good as we say we are. And I think we are outstanding institutions. These will help us get even better. Now, Rick is available for questions if you have any of the questions on that documentation contained in those reports. You've had them for a while. Hearing none, we will now move to the IARB and CAE reports. Let's proceed starting with ASU. Morgan and Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll just make a couple of introductory comments, and then, as usual, Lisa will do most of the work. The IARB at Arizona State University is continuing to function well. We've had a couple of changes in the composition of the committee in terms of people, just as a result of people taking other opportunities or moving to other jobs within the university. And so a couple of areas have new representatives, but I don't think we've missed a beat at all. And I think the key thing that we've talked about in the past, but continues to be the case, is that it's a real opportunity for us to be a learning organization and to identify things that may have cropped up elsewhere or happened in one part of the university, and working through communication and looking at our policies, processes, procedures to make sure that it doesn't recur. So all of that's going well. We had a meeting just about a week ago, and reviewed a number of things that I suspect Lisa will go over in detail, so as not to steal her thunder, I'll let her do that. But again, things are continuing to operate smoothly, and we have a number of reports that Lisa will review with you today. And if there are any questions, happy to answer those, or we can turn to Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. All right, we've completed 2 assurance projects that I have presented in the materials today, as well as 2 advisory reviews, and closed out 8 previously identified audit issues since we last met. The first assurance review was over coaching contracts. Specifically, we looked at multiple year agreements for head coaches, assessed the compliance to the ABOR policy for that, as well as NCAA requirements. We looked at fiscal controls and oversights to ensure the terms of the contract were paid out appropriately. As part of that review, no significant issues were noted. We did have 2 opportunities for improvement noted, one related to taxable fringe benefits, the other related to some isolated instances where specific terms were missing from contracts. More so, amendments had not been executed yet for new terms in the contracts rather than missing contracts. The second assurance project was a strategic partnership audit focused on High Tech, who's an IT security provider that helps with our managed services at the university, as well as infrastructure projects. This was a financial and operational focus project. It was not intended to be a technical project. What we assessed is management's oversight over that agreement and the third party. We also looked at the fiscal controls related to the agreement to ensure that payments made were according to the contract itself. There's also several operational controls required as part of the contract around service level agreements, onboarding employees, training, background checks, screenings, those type of things. Again, there were no significant issues noted on that agreement, although there were multiple opportunities for improvement noted as well. Our advisory projects that we've completed, one was a project from FY21 related to software licensing. We also completed an advisory review over HIPAA privacy. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions on the projects themselves before I continue.
Any questions, members? No, they were straightforward. Thank you.
Great. We're making good progress on the plan itself. We have 1 carryover project that we're still wrapping up from 21. We also have 5 different projects in motion from the 22 plan that we're in various stages of. We are still down 1 audit resource, which we've been down for the full fiscal year, essentially. Similar to many different areas across the university, probably all 3 universities, we are continuing to struggle with filling that position. We're actively posting, looking at different ways to augment our staff. I've added a part-time position just to augment ongoing. I'm also having difficulty filling the part-time position, but we're just looking at a variety of ways to fill that. So as a result, we are removing 3 projects from the project plan. We did not remove any in November, just holding to see if we were able to fill the position and to be able to prioritize what we wanted to remove from the plan. The projects that have been removed were approved in IRB in January as well as March. We're removing a contracting audit that was focused on operational type contracts that are executed across the organization for management of those contracts, as well as wireless security. Both of those projects were really selected because of the remaining projects we hadn't started were just of higher priority or of a specific request within the university. The third project we're moving is vulnerability management. We're removing that, we selected that for removal just because of the status of remediation actions. We still have 3 significant issues tied to that audit that are in motion. They're making good progress. Their planned remediation should be done by the end of the fiscal year. However, it will not be ready for us to review until after that to allow time for the actions to be in place. So that project will just roll directly to our FY23 audit plan. The other 2 projects will just be considered as part of our risk assessment as we're creating the 23 plan to see if they should be prioritized or not. Any questions on status that I can answer?
Questions from anyone? No, thank you very much. Oh, yes, please. Regent Duvall.
I will, and I'm not sure whether this is the right place, but you mentioned vulnerability risk. Look, who knows whether or not what the president and CIA and others are saying about Russia's potential in the cyberspace, but I am curious where you think our vulnerability is most severe and how we're preparing for it.
Sure. So from a vulnerability management program, is that what you mean just across the university?
Yes.
So we have good processes that have been put in place. As part of the audit that we performed last year, we did identify some significant issues, which I'll provide a more detailed update on. However, they have made significant progress on implementing a new tool to manage their vulnerability management program. They've also brought our scanning in-house. It was previously being done by an outside third party. So bringing that in-house combined with the new module that's being implemented, both from a network perspective as well as an application perspective, has really provided more expertise within the information security team that manages that group. It's also involved various training opportunities across the decentralized IT groups, which are also utilizing the new module. As part of implementation, they're doing a phased approach where they're training those groups and working with them on their known vulnerabilities at this point in time as part of that implementation and training. So while our issues are still open, I think we're in a much better place than we were at the time of the audit, just with the progression of a better tool being utilized that makes it easier for the end units to manage the vulnerabilities, as well as to give a better visibility of what's truly outstanding.
Do you have an opinion as to where you think we are most vulnerable? What aspect of the IT?
Oh, just from a control perspective. I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood. I'm just thinking, I would say it's probably twofold from my perspective, and it's not from a necessary concern perspective, but just the nature of our use of the cloud. We have a very heavily reliance on a cloud structure, which introduces third-party risk from those providers. So I think that is one area, just because we're really reliant on our management of those relationships and understanding their control environments, but the actual execution of those controls are obviously outside of our control. So from that area, I think the other piece that feeds in significantly is just our decentralized framework across the institution. We have a central UTO group which manage a lot of the controls, but we also have many IT assets that are managed by the individual units themselves, which just have a variety of different control structures.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. From an issue management program, we still have 5 significant issues that are open. The materials include the aging of those issues. The first issue is related to a unit's default administrator level access. Remediation is on plan, on target for remediation in September. Their initial attempts to remediate that were not successful. However, they're working with the central UTO team to address that and to implement an enhanced Active Directory group policy to address that issue. The next 3 issues are the vulnerability management issues that I just spoke to. Those are on target to be remediated by the end of the fiscal year. I've already provided an update of the different items that are in motion. So those are in progress. The one area that was delayed is related to the reporting of the vulnerability management. That has been delayed. Initially, it was intended to be remediated by the end of March. That has been pushed to 4th quarter just because of a shortage of ServiceNow developers that are needed for that activity. The final issue we have is chemical inventory. That issue has been outstanding for a while. The team has made good progress over this last fiscal year, including obtaining a new chemical management system that has been licensed. They're in the process of implementing that system now, working through just different applications of that. The other piece of that remediation is a central receiving for chemical inventory or chemical materials. That is being implemented on an existing property that requires renovations to actually implement that process. That is currently in the design phase with the intention of the renovations hopefully being completed during Q1 of fiscal year 23. Until they're through that design phase, that could move depending on the outcome of the design, but that is the initial target for now. Any questions on significant issues I can answer?
Don't think so. Very clear. Thank you.
Great.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
Thank you both.
All right.
Let's move to Bjorn and Mark. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Shootman. IARB at NAU has met 2 times, once in January and once in February. We've reviewed the status of resolving outstanding items, and we've closed 17 of them since our last meeting in November, which is good progress. So we're continuing to make progress on those. We also had a good discussion in January to review the IARB charter as we had shifted the IARB structure and had mentioned last meeting in November, and really wanted to bring that charter and the responsibilities and focus back to the forefront for all members so that they could really see that. And then in February, we had also made a good discussion on how do we really truly categorize significant opportunities for improvement? What are those criteria behind those significant opportunities? So we had a good discussion on that, and really to set forward a process behind that. So we've had good discussions. I think the refocused IARB at NAU is really providing good focus and momentum behind closing out outstanding items. Mark will go through the progress that we have made, and certainly there are issues, as ASU had indicated, just in terms of staffing and the ability to tackle everything. And Mark will get into that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions too. So with that, I'll let Mark take it over and provide an update on some of the reports.
Mark.
Thank you, Regent Schumann. So we've issued one report since the November meeting, which was a compliance risk assessment. This was important in that we focused on what was identified to be 250 plus federal and state laws, and that's just the high level law. So, the Americans with Disability Act has a lot of requirements. Title IX has a lot of requirements. So it's really just a high level. There's a lot to comply with. Since it's an assessment, we did not include a control chart, and we do not have improvement opportunities specifically. The report does address possible benefits of having some type of oversight structure. Right now, it's very decentralized, where we have specific research compliance individuals who take care of things like HIPAA compliance and IT security issues and so on, the HR things that I mentioned. As of now, no specific action has been taken, but as I think you're aware of the strategic roadmap process that Dr. Cruz Rivera has set forth. So I think decisions around what we might do will follow that. We did look at the ABOR approved peers for NAU, and 60+% of them do have some type of centralized compliance oversight structure. So it wouldn't be uncommon for us to do, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to do it either. So it's certainly a business decision, if you will, in terms of what resources we want to lay out, given all the other demands on finances. So if there's any questions on the compliance risk assessment, the other thing to add there is we did not validate and test every aspect of compliance. The goal was to look across those 250 plus laws, rules, and regulations and determine, does NAU have some type of process, policy, website, some action dedicated to it. So we knew about it and we've taken action. And in general, we did. There were a few areas that weren't, I deemed minor, made those individuals aware that we might need to improve in some cases. But in general, compliance oversight looks really good in that regard, that we have everything addressed. So, the report didn't come out to say that we have a big gaping hole, which was the good part about it. But there is this concept of oversight, if you will. So I don't know if there's any questions on compliance risk.
You'll let us know as Bjorn, you decide as an institution how you're going to cover this in the future. There are advantages to that centralized compliance structure. All it takes is money and people. So
Very
piece of cake.
Which is why I did not make it a formal improvement opportunity. That's too big of a decision. So.
But good point, Chair Shootman. And it might be a reporting mechanism that we have with the advisory structures that we are putting in place, here at NAU. President Cruz Rivera has mentioned a budget advisory council, but we're also going to have a university advisory council. So it might be a reporting mechanism on compliance in conjunction with that. So
That has some real advantages of spreading the awareness
yes.
throughout your leadership structure. So very good.
So then moving on to the current plan, we are still down one employee out of the two we have. So we are dealing with the same things that Lisa mentioned, although certainly Flagstaff has its additional challenges of quite an increase in the cost of living in the last couple of years. Seems odd to me still that, we have a pandemic and yet everyone's buying houses. So there you have it. But nonetheless, it's definitely created a challenge that we are dealing with. We're looking at student employment. We've had a very successful intern program, which is each semester. So they're very short-term hires, but so far we've had 3 great interns and it's worked out well in that regard. We did just reinitiate our 4th attempt to bring in candidates. In the meantime, I'm actually struggling with, I would love to have a bunch of student employees because as higher ed, it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, as a small shop, it means I have to manage every audit down to specific tasks, which makes the job a lot harder. But we're going to do what we've got to do to keep moving forward. In that regard, IARB approved deferring 3 projects to assurance, 1 consulting, and then we're working on certain scope reductions as well on the remaining projects. So I know there was discussions about IT. We did not, obviously there's a requirement that we address IT security each year. So our focus this cycle will be on a deep dive in our physical access controls and badge swiping systems. We had some high-level issues with that in our access management audit 2 years ago. So we want to do a deep dive to see, well, we believe we've addressed it, but have we? And are there additional things that we might want to identify going forward? So any questions on plan status? So we have 1 significant improvement opportunity still out. Oh, wait.
Sorry, Regent Herbal.
I don't know that this is the right time to ask it, but I'm curious about this export control issue that's been going on and on and on and on. You describe in here the fact that the change in leadership is an issue. I didn't understand, first of all, what is the issue? And secondly, why is that relevant?
So, and I was just going to discuss, that's the 1 significant item that's outstanding. So the issue with export control is we had identified an export control administrator, which is required by federal regulations. But the way that was structured originally was that only for research. But export control impacts a lot of other areas across the entire organization besides just research. So international affairs, procurement, IT, there are a lot of areas that get impacted. So we really wanted to try to put something in place that ensures we have oversight of all those areas and someone with authority to make appropriate decisions. Since the audit was completed, we lost the VP of research. That VP was replaced ultimately with an interim who was just made VP. Given where we are with the new president, we decided, the group decided we're going to wait until after we get past this semester and use the sort of lower intensity time over the summer to revisit the whole concept around how do we restructure around export control.
So do we have vulnerabilities in this area?
So the thing with export control for NAU is at the time we did the audit, we had 4 export control projects across the whole university. So in that regard, we don't have a lot of projects where we have risk. And we have procedures in place to manage those for the most part, and there's things that are being cleaned up. In that regard, part of this oversight was around the concept. We've expanded research at NAU greatly over the last 5 or 6 years. We still need to follow up with some infrastructure behind that. So the concern was if we're going to continue to expand research, we need to get in front of the export control as much as we can. So I think our vulnerabilities are not super high yet, but will we get there? And if we're not prepared, will we set ourselves up for vulnerabilities that we do not want to have to deal with? I don't know if that answers your question, but happy to try again.
Partially. I'm confused by the title, export control. Okay, it sounds like it covers a variety of sins.
Okay.
What exactly does it cover? What is its
So generally, and to think of it as a research-only issue is very easy to do because most of the risks are in the research arena. So if we have a grant from the Department of Defense, for instance,
Yeah.
we've got to be very careful about who sees the data that we're generating through that research project, making sure we don't have international students involved in that research. So there's a lot of issues around.
Now we're getting to
right?
the
So
heart.
the regulations deal with protecting U.S. secrets, if you will,
Okay.
in essence.
Now I get it.
And I'm not an export control expert, so obviously if there's anyone here who can speak to that more, I'm happy to defer. But in general, that covers it, I think. So
Very helpful. Thank you.
you're welcome. And trying to think if I missed anything in my presentation. So we covered the plan, we covered the outstanding improvement opportunities. I think that's pretty much it, unless there are questions on reports or otherwise, so.
Chair Manson.
Just a very quick question. On the chart that's the all open improvement opportunities, and there's 16 projects that have been open for 360 days or more, 16. Are those stalled? Are they?
Most, I would say, are in progress. Some may be stalled, depending on current priorities and resources and that type of thing. But in general, we're seeing progress. The IRB is very aware of each of those items as we meet to make sure that we're getting them addressed. As Bjorn mentioned, we did have a lot of good progress in the last few months since November with 17.
Yeah.
Our total numbers reduced.
Yeah, no, that was fabulous. I just was curious. It's a very heavy load of what's out there that's still quite old. So.
It is, and Mark's team does a good job in terms of the report that is provided each quarter to basically say, has some progress been made? And indicates, how much commentary, what it is, and, on the flip side, if there has been no progress. So he provides good input to our team, and we take a look at that report then each time we have an IARB meeting to review that information.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything further?
I think we're good.
That's it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As Lisa and Sarah come up, I just want to point out that in Arizona right now, there are over 220,000 open jobs that we cannot fill as a state. And when you look at the production of degrees that we are capable of, we fall short between now and 2030, somewhere around 25,000 degrees per year that we really need to fill the jobs we're creating. We're starting to see it. Notice in the number of presentations today where workforce is a problem, there is no limit on our ability to expand other than the resources to do it. And the state of Arizona is going to have to think long and hard about how we meet this demand. Just in 4-year degrees alone, we are importing, companies are importing 19,000 4-year degree holders annually to fill jobs that Arizonans are not capable of filling. So this is, it's kind of just something that occurred to me I wanted to share because we're starting to see it in our universities in multiple levels. And when you get into a situation like they have in Flagstaff, high cost of living, and I mean, we certainly, U of A struggled with it for a long period of time, but keep fingers crossed, we're not there now. So welcome, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Shootman. I could not agree with you more, and I was having pains as I was listening to my colleagues from ASU and NAU about being without internal auditors. So I'm going to find some chains to make sure that Sarah stays to her chair. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that she and her team have been doing this year, given everything that we've tasked them with. So there's a lot of information in your packet, and I will only highlight a few things. I am grateful to our IARB. They continue to be highly engaged and provide lots of insight and guidance that helps inform our plans moving forward. We also have had 2 meetings since we last met. In March, we gathered to discuss strategic risks, which Regent Duval are even more important now given what's happening in the world. And in January we met, we really took your advice to heart, and we reviewed the entire fiscal year 22 audit plan. And we did that with an assessment of what we felt the value was of the report that would be generated, particularly for the older audits. We heard that was how you would like us to focus, and we really wanted to understand, would the information still be relevant today? So with that in mind, the committee approved canceling one audit. That was the CARES Act compliance review. We feel like the CARES funding is going to be reviewed by the state, the feds, and that it probably would be duplicative to have Sarah's team focus on that. We had 4 open audits that we closed, and they were 3 contract audits and then 1 process audit that stems from those contract audits. We were able to close those because we no longer had relationships with the companies whose contracts would have been audited, and we don't have similar relationships in the organizations where those contracts were housed. And then we postponed 4 audits from 22, which will roll to the 23 plan. That was campus health and wellness. What we recognize is that the ongoing pandemic has really not allowed our campus health and wellness team to pivot back to normal operations. So we felt like it made sense to hold that until next year. Our College of Law business practice, we have a new assistant dean for finance, and we felt like it made sense to allow that person to get to know the business and potentially make some positive improvements before we have an internal audit. Our contract management with American Campus Communities, that's with our Honors Village. We know that that is going to take substantial time and it really will need focus. So we felt that we should move it to next year to allow Sarah's team to focus on other things this year. And then a similar situation with our IT security vendor management of our student admissions cloud-based system. That too is going to be an intensive audit and will need more time. So we'll focus on that in fiscal year 23. And as I said, I'm really pleased that Sarah's team has been very productive since our last meeting. They've issued 5 reports that she'll talk about. They're the Hillenbrand Aquatic Center construction audit, the Arizona Stadium renovation construction audit, Oracle agreements review, senior administration accounts review, and then a decentralized unit IT review that was for our facilities management team. And I would like to give a big shout out to all of our partners across campus who have been working with Sarah's team on our outstanding items. Sarah's team was able to complete 11 follow-up items, and then 2 of our previous red or significant opportunities with our Nike audits are now nearly complete. And we look forward to sharing more progress about those at a future meeting. And I will turn it over to Sarah to give you more detail.
Thanks, Lisa. I echo what Lisa said. We've got a lot going on. I'm proud of our team and the progress they've made. We don't work in a vacuum, so we're also dependent and grateful for the colleagues across the university that we have to work with that have helped us close out a number of items. Lisa mentioned 5 issued internal audit reports. Let's just start with those. 2 of them are construction contract audits, so I'm going to kind of lump them together. Because the key reasons for the audit and the key risk would be the same. So the construction contract audits have been identified as strategic high risk because of the dollar amounts. And so the key risk that we look at is we look at financial transactions to ensure that they're in compliance with the construction contract. And for both of them, we had, they're both managed by planning, design, and construction. And for both of them, there were no reportable findings.
So we always like to talk about what we learned from the reports. And I would say here that we learned that our planning, design, and construction team really remains an engaged partner, especially with internal audit, and they are always willing to improve their processes. And we also like to thank our colleagues in athletics who were very supportive for the renovation construction audit.
The next issued internal audit report was the Oracle Agreements Review. The key reason for this audit is Oracle's a third-party cloud provider. By nature, those are identified as strategic high risk. And the key risks addressed by the audit was to focus on the totality of the existing agreements and process and controls for the execution, management, understanding of the existing agreements, including the reason for an unexpected high cost $120,000 invoice related to our cancer center. We identified 2 yellow opportunities on this one. Oracle was not contacted to verify new usage of existing licenses. So to determine whether the new uses complied with the terms for the existing licenses. In the case of the Cancer Center, it was an unapproved use, hence the $120,000 billing that nobody was planning on. The other issue we identified was there's no central point of contact to manage the agreement with Oracle, and so there's no oversight over any of the multiple agreements. So UITS has since partnered with PACS, and CIO approval will be required for all Oracle purchases greater than $100,000. Additionally, UITS has committed to retaining and managing all Oracle agreements and will serve as the primary point of contact for the Oracle relationship going forward.
And this one, I think, reminds us of things that we talked about in November, that it's really important for us to have centralized the execution, the monitoring and reporting of contracts. It's important for us to invest in resources that will help us properly monitor agreements. So we're working on that actively.
The next issued internal audit report is Senior Administration Accounts Audit. And this audit was identified as high risk given the position that the employees hold within the university. The key risks would be reputational, operational, strategic, tone at the top, if you will. And we reviewed activity for compliance with university policies and procedures. For this audit, we used data analytics on 100% population of the transactions for which senior vice presidents were actively involved in deciding how the funds were used. Based on the analytics, 195 transactions were identified as potentially higher risk, so the audit team sampled those. They were very pleased with the level of compliance that they saw within the units, both for the managing of the workflow, for self-reporting of violations. And we found no reportable findings on this audit.
And I'd like to say that I'm really proud of our business colleagues across the university, particularly in these areas, for taking their responsibilities seriously, recognizing the reputational risk associated with senior administration accounts, and for being very responsive to Sarah's team and following up on all of their questions.
Thank you. And the last issued internal audit report is an older one. Well, the audit work was done a while back. It is a decentralized unit IT general controls review within the facilities management unit. The audit fieldwork was performed in 2016. That was back when we did not have a CIO. There was a brief period of time we did not have a CIO. We'd had one before, we have one now, not then. So what we were looking at were existing IT general controls within the facilities management. They are responsible for some mission critical assets, and data, the utility plant, for example. And so we looked at the controls in place. We found one item. There wasn't a documented, integrated change management process that included patch management. And so Chris and Kevin immediately addressed this in May 2017. Remember, our fieldwork is in 2016. So they had this addressed by May 2017, long before we got this report issued. They issued a new change management policy and a new patch management policy. And in the interim, and the institution has new security policies, their policies have evolved and improved and reference the current existing institutional policies. So they're not out there on an island by themselves.
And here I'd also like to say thank you to Chris Kopak and Kevin Williams. Kevin is the Director of IT and Facilities Management, for being so responsive, given that they have been also managing our incident command system at the University of Arizona, still prioritizing our internal audit work.
And if you'll note, if you read the full text materials, I don't know how many pages they are, Regent Schupman, but I know there's a lot. There were 5 institution-specific external audit reports. 2 of them had identified issues. Both have since been corrected. The SNAP-Ed, Navajo County was identified and corrected before the final memo was sent out. There was one issue identified in the NCAA agreed upon procedures review, and that is, I've been told that has been corrected as well. In terms of improvement opportunities, we were able to remediate 11, including 6 of our very oldest open items. So that was an exciting day.
It's nice to cross it off the list, right?
Oh, yeah. So exciting. We've been working on those since, gosh, I can't even remember who the CFO was at the time. Before Lisa's tenure. And substantial progress has been made on 2 of the 3 red items. I didn't look at the 3rd red item because its target implementation date hasn't passed yet. But for the other 2, the units have made substantial improvements. You know, just with anything, it's, 90% goes very well, and it's that last 5 to 10% that takes a little bit longer. You have to get more people involved. I'll remind the committee that both of the Nike agreements are older agreements. And as is the case with older agreements, business processes change. For the sponsorship one, it was the annual labor reports and the review that wasn't occurring. Well, when the report was written, they were paper documents. Over time, the method of report delivery has changed, and the method of reviewing that has changed. So it's taken a little bit longer for ICA to figure out who gets it, who sees it, how it's discussed. So we're almost there. They've given me a 4:30 target deadline. So we'll be hounding Mario again here quite quickly. For the trademarks and licensing, remember they weren't reconciling the trademark payments when they came in. They have really done a great deal on this one. They have created standard operating procedures, and they developed those together with CLC. They went back and revised them to add an executive review component. They were consulting with the senior auditor that worked on the audit, have him look at the procedures. What do you think? Are we missing something? So then they took the procedures and they applied them to the 3rd quarter payment to make sure the procedures worked. Well, when you do that, and again, this is another old agreement, they found a couple of royalty rates that didn't match the written agreement. So now this last little bit is to find out, okay, what are these valid? Should they be? Is there another written agreement or document that addresses these? And so now they're working on that. And it's interesting to note that one of those rates, Nike came back and said, oh, well, we intended to add that royalty rate in the 2018 renewal process when they did an amendment. Okay, now it's 2022. So again, issues with an older contract, but they are making quite a bit of progress, and they have pushed their implementation date to 6/30. So excited about that. And Lisa talked about the changes to the audit plan. There's a lot more color on it this time. I'm excited to see that. The team is working hard for the 22 audits that are FY 22 audits that are still on there. At the January IARB meeting, we went through all of those and we talked about tightening what we're looking at, what's the real high risk here, and what we're gonna look at to try to get those items moving along. So with that, I'll stop. I'm happy to answer any questions.
May I just interject one moment that
Of course.
we phoned a friend and we have an export control colleague on the line on Zoom. Dr. Betsy Cantwell has joined us on Zoom. If you would like to ask further questions about export control, Regent Herbold.
That was for you, Regent Herbold, if you
Yeah,
have the
no
further
questions at this
explanation.
point. I think the explanation earlier helped me a lot. Now I understand where you're coming from. It's, it deserves a better label.
And there she is.
I have one question, though.
Please.
In regard to, you referenced the Nike contract before. How well along are we in resolving all these issues with Nike?
We are, well, we're almost there. We know what they are. We know why we have them. The footwear, the 5% footwear, apparently that's standard with all the Nike schools. That's the one that should have been in the 2018
Yep.
renewal and wasn't. And the other one, I'm hearing is an NCAA royalty rate percentage. So the good news, it doesn't look like that we're way out of whack in terms of what we're getting. But now it's a matter of, okay, well, do we need to do an amendment to incorporate these? And so it's just that little bit. And of course, Marcom can't do that on their own. They would have to work with Nike and on our general counsel.
Is there one person at the operation that really is the czar of the Nike contract?
I think it's joint, really, from what I'm hearing. Since the audit, Marcom, Marketing and Communications, under which Trademarks and Licensing is housed, has really stepped up. ICA is a key player as well. It's kind of like a joint.
Yeah, that can be troublesome. In terms of, who really worries about it when they go home at night. So it's on these complicated contracts, especially with the amount of money that I assume we're talking about here. If you're getting your fair share from these people.
Yes, you may
is
remember that
significant.
was my concern, that we were leaving money on the table. And I think
Yeah.
that both our Senior Vice President for Marketing Communications and our athletics partners are working hard to ensure that we get everything that we should from the contract and that we give Nike what we are expected to return.
Got it. Thank you.
So, Senior Vice President Cantwell, welcome. It turns out we probably don't need your expertise on that issue any longer, but you're welcome to stay. It's a scintillating audit committee meeting.
Very happy to be with this. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Great job.
So, members of the committee, any questions for Lisa or Sarah? No, well done. Thank you both. And thanks to all three of our teams, our CFOs and our chief auditors. I think we owe Rick and the team at ABOR a lot of thanks for the changes that we've made over the last 18 months in audit. I think we now have better reports to look at. The reports from IARB and the auditors together have certainly improved our level of understanding. So we appreciate the work of the universities and our team at the ABOR office. We're now going to move to another issue. We had the presentation from the University of Arizona on the enterprise risk model, on their version of it. Today we have the opportunity to hear from Arizona State. The presenters are Nicole Luoma, Vice President, University Business Services, University Sustainability Operations, and Chief Procurement Officer. You've got a long title. And Lisa Grace. Proceed, please, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to do just a quick intro here and then turn it over to the primary presenters here. So I think the committee knows Lisa Grace well, the executive director of our university audit function. Also here with us is our colleague Nicole Luoma. Nicole, as you mentioned, is Vice President for University Business Services and also has additional important responsibilities, but is here today because of the key role that she and her team play in how the university manages risk. And so Fundamentally, our approach is based on the belief that management owns risk. There is a lot of work that goes on around that, to orchestrate and make sure that we have the right tone at the top. But fundamentally, the whole range of risk is owned by management for the various areas of the university. And of course, with a big research university like ASU, that encompasses a wide variety of functions and lines of business, if you will. What we do in terms of trying to work on all this is that we have a collaboration between assurance, which is really represented by Lisa, and then also management, Nicole. And so Nicole is responsible for our risk management office, which also includes our insurance functions, which are pretty complex for a university. She's also responsible for our emergency preparedness function. At any given time, on our 4 campuses and around the world, there are multiple things going on with a high degree of complexity. She's also responsible for our supply chain operations, which we learned are really pretty critical to managing certain types of risks. And I'm sure that Nicole will talk about that a little bit more. But really, our presentation is focused first on how we identify risks, and then how we mitigate the risks that we can, and how we ultimately manage the risks that we can't mitigate or eliminate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the ladies.
Great, thank you. Next slide, if you could, please. Part of the ask was just our definition of enterprise risk management. What you see up here is actually COSO's definition from their risk management framework. It defines ERM as a process that's affected by the board as well as management, that is applied across the university to identify potential events that may affect the entity, and to manage those risks within our risk appetite to provide reasonable assurance that we can meet our objectives. So I feel like that is a good representation of how ASU manages enterprise risk management overall. Next slide, please. The 4 areas that ASU classifies risk as are financial, operational, compliance, and information technology. Financial risks are those areas that would impact the financial stability of the institution. So balanced budgets, funding sources, liquidity, investment strategy. Operational risks are the process, the application, and the activities that are performed as part of our daily operations. So those include areas such as academic affairs, campus and student life, facilities, deferred maintenance, HR, athletics, research, those areas. Compliance risks are defined as those risks that result in potential loss or sanctions from failing to comply with laws and regulations. So again, across the university, we have many different compliance areas, FERPA, HIPAA, GDPR, NCAA. All of those have unique risks that have to be managed to ensure that we're complying. The final area, information technology, are really those risks related to unintentional and unplanned interruptions to business, negative outcomes that result from the misuse or failure of information technology. So again, examples in those areas would include ransomware, denial of service, those type of areas. All 4 of those types of risks feed up into reputational risk, which is really defined as the potential loss resulting from damages to ASU's reputation in the form of lost revenue, increased expenses, as well as loss of public confidence. Next slide, please.
Okay, so while we believe and we expect that every manager at ASU is responsible for risk, and excuse my voice, I'm getting over some allergies, not COVID. We do have
17 times.
Seriously. We do have 2 oversight committees that are enterprise-wide. And like I said, we expect every manager at ASU to be responsible for risk, and we have multiple committees that part of their charter is to make sure that their activities are appropriately mitigated from a risk perspective. Excuse me. We look at our our roadmap for risk. You're very familiar, I'm sure, with the annual enterprise risk assessment that Lisa and her team does. She'll talk about that a little bit more. We have our internal audit review board as well. Again, senior cross-functional group is represented in that unit. And then Emergency Preparedness Committee, that is chaired by Morgan, and it's also under my unit. So we have, again, senior representation focused on operations of the university and making sure that we are, paying attention to and mitigating risk. We're going to talk a little bit about those in 2 slides. Next slide, please.
So the first area is the enterprise risk assessment that's performed across the university. The chart you see up there, you should be familiar with. It is the risk assessment methodology that we've used for the last several years to perform our risk assessment. It's a 5-phase process that really ensures that we're identifying risk in a meaningful manner across the university. The first phase is to define our audit universe. We currently have 90 defined auditable units, which can be a department, a function, or process that we would complete a discrete internal audit activity in. From there, we defined risk measures and risk scales. So the risk measures that we utilize are the significance to achieving our objectives at ASU, of achieving our mission, the financial impact of potential control failure, management oversight, the complexity and operations of a auditable unit, HR, as well as the legal and regulatory exposure of the unit, and the level of management external oversight of that unit. For each one of those risk measures, we have a scale of 1 to 5 to define the risk associated with that. The third phase is to identify and measure the risk. We do that in 2 different activities. First, we identify our stakeholders that should be involved in this process. So for us, we involve executive leadership, senior leadership, the internal audit review board, as well as the key stakeholders across the auditable units that are defined. In order to measure the risk, we do a risk survey every 3 years at the auditable unit level, which is a survey assessing each of those defined measures using the defined risk scale. The output from that is really intended to be able to apply a risk rating to each of those auditable units as critical, high, medium, or low. The second component of that are just risk interviews. So on an annual basis, both as part of the risk assessment process itself, as well as just ongoing throughout the year, having those discussions with senior leadership, with the internal audit review board, as well as those key stakeholders on what the current risks are in our environment. Using that information, we go to phase 4, which is really to prioritize the risk. So factoring in the risk rating of the auditable unit, combined with the risk themes that have been identified as part of the risk discussions, those will both be combined to develop the annual audit plan, which will focus our hours in the areas of greatest risk. The final phase is to report out and get approval for that process. The second component of our program is really the internal audit review board itself. As Nicole mentioned, it's comprised of senior leadership representing core areas of the university. So we have those perspectives in our discussions on an ongoing basis. These individuals are also involved in committees and initiatives across the university, as well as being responsible for risks within their own portfolios as well. Included in that, they're a standalone key stakeholder group as part of the risk assessment process. And then finally, they're also the approving body of our risk assessment and the annual audit plan.
Next slide, please. So for Emergency Preparedness Committee, again, senior level group, it includes risk management, which reports up through me, chief financial officer, police, environmental health and safety, that also reports up through me, the university technology office and facilities. And then we have invites as needed, depending on the issue that we're talking about. We are constantly looking at the environment, paying attention to incidences that happen on campuses, happen at large scale events. As you know, we have a large venue right next door, Sun Devil Stadium. And so we're paying attention to what's happening. We're very connected with the community. City of Tempe, when we have PATS run, we're very involved. We stand up our emergency operations center, and we're working hand in hand with local law enforcement to make sure that goes well. We do oversee the enterprise continuity of operations plans. Every unit is expected to have a continuity of operations plan or a COOP plan. You might hear that term. We have over 140 plans that are being managed. And then we also identify and lead tabletop exercises. We recently completed a ransomware tabletop. Senior levels of the university were included, multiple cross-functional areas, FBI and others, right? So we are paying attention to what's happening at that macro level. We are planning an active shooter tabletop in the next few months. And so again, we're just constantly, especially with employees that turn over, making sure that we're rehearsing and looking at these scenarios as they come up. Next slide, please. So to demonstrate actual application of emergency preparedness, we've had a pandemic committee for over 15 years, and our head of EH&S sits on the emergency preparedness group. And so we were paying attention to COVID
Environmental health and safety.
Yes, sorry, environmental health and safety. We were paying attention to COVID early on. So we started listening in December when started hitting the news. In early January, the team was actively having discussions in the pandemic committee. And we decided to have a tabletop exercise on January 23rd. January 26th, we had the first positive at ASU, which was one of the first in the nation. And by that time, we'd already talked to our researchers who are very well versed in coronavirus. Coronavirus is not new. The 2019 COVID-19 virus is new. But we asked, what would we need if this becomes a thing? And we found out, you know what, we probably would need very surgical grade masks, which became a thing. And we would probably need hand sanitizer. We would need ways to sanitize the environment if we wanted to stay on campus. And so early on, we ordered those supplies. We were ordering supplies in January when many people were still wondering what was going on. So continuity of operations plan, as we progressed through the pandemic, we started saying, okay, what happens if we go remote? Everybody pull out your operations plan. We did find some things that we needed to action right away, but because we had that framework in place as an emergency preparedness group, we had done tabletops, we were poised and ready to go. Those relationships that we've had where we've gone through those scenario planning came to fruition, right? We were able to execute quickly because we knew each other and we knew what the plan was. We stood up the incident command system and we executed. So overall, I think we did a really good job, and that goes back to us running tabletops and planning for these types of things all along. Next slide. So overall, I think what we've portrayed is that we're not afraid of risk. We are actively managing risk, obviously, to be number one in innovation. We have to be willing to take risk, but we also have to be really smart about how we're mitigating and managing risk as a result. Any questions?
Questions, comments from anybody? Looks like everybody's pretty well satisfied. Just a quick question for my own curiosity. Do you ever do the full-blown exercise beyond tabletop where you involve the actual first responders? And
we do. So those 1 to 2 large-scale events usually include local law enforcement, depending on what the exercise is.
Do a couple of those a year?
Yep.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and we've
That's
NAU and U of A have participated. We embrace our tri-university relationship.
So is this the committee, the Emergency Response Committee? Is that where the war in the Ukraine would come up, or other international threats? Where would that first emerge into your system?
We do have an international operations committee, but it would be in this emergency preparedness structure. And I'm sure on Dr. Crow's executive committee. I don't know, Morgan, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. Only that it was that would fall into kind of our environmental scanning approach. You and I had a conversation a little bit earlier today, and I think we're all still trying to understand all the elements of the developments across the globe, and what impacts that might have around the world, and certainly for us. And so that's something that we do try to anticipate as best as possible. My main role in some of this is I can't remember which one it is because I don't actually watch too much television, but there's some crime show on TV where they always talk about ripped from the headlines. Well, I'm the guy who reads stuff on the internet and says, okay, this happened over there. Are we ready for that? So I irritate these folks and a whole lot of other people by throwing those kinds of things on the table to try to understand, have we thought about that? Are we prepared for it? What could happen, and what would we need to do or not do in order to respond? So, we're sure we don't have crystal balls and we're not perfect, but we do our best to try to, anticipate and make sure that, we are able to execute fairly quickly, as Nicole said.
Well, I commend you for the planning that you're doing and the depth of the development of your emergency response. That sort of thing is, I think, critical to all of us and to the operations of our scale. So congratulations on that. Any questions or comments from any of the audit committee? Very good. Well, I want to thank everybody for this public portion of the meeting. A great job by all. This will conclude the public portion of our meeting. We have to vote.